In adolescence, there are certain gender differences in cognitive abilities that become more pronounced. Some of these have kind of been there through childhood, but they become more emphasized during adolescence. Girls tend to have better performance in verbal abilities, whereas boys in general tend to have better math abilities. For girls, that may be due to some brain development. So it's been shown that they tend to have earlier development of the left hemisphere, which we know is really important for language abilities. They also may get more verbal stimulation. So in friendships and even in like parent-child relationships, girls are more conversational. They tend to talk more, whereas boys, when they're with their friends or something, they may be instead engaged in activities, playing sports, playing video games, or something like that. And so just that more practice having conversation may lead to the more verbal ability. In addition to that, some of the language arts are considered more feminine, and so it may be due also to like stereotypes and experience. And so through all of these, boys tend to be poorer both in like their verbal speaking, but also in their writing skills compared to girls. Math, it's been shown that boys tend to have advantages in numerical memory and also spatial reasoning, which I'll talk about spatial reasoning more in just a second. Again, that may partially be due to experience. So historically, like the STEM fields have been sort of dominated by males and have been considered a more masculine field. And girls, through like implicit stereotypes and things like that, may be, may not be as likely to pursue those careers. And kind of in line with that idea, it's been shown that countries that have higher or have better gender equality don't show this difference. So this graph over here is showing basically the larger the bar, the bigger difference there is between boys and girls' math abilities. If the bar is going up, then that means that boys are scoring higher. If the bar is going down, then that means girls are scoring higher. And you have the yellow countries are ones that have really low gender equality. The red ones are kind of medium, and then the purple ones are ones that have really like high gender equality. And you can see the purple ones, they're pretty much equal in their math ability. And so it really could be just social, cultural factors that are contributing to both of these differences that you see. Historically too, boys have tended to acquire more specialized computer knowledge as well, so they tend to, things like learning how to code, learning how to just use technology and computers. Boys tend to engage in those activities more. And again, that may be due to a biological component, or it may be due to a more like social, cultural component. So I mentioned, in addition to math abilities, one of the strongest gender differences that you see as far as cognitive abilities is that males tend to have better spatial reasoning than females. They tend to be better, for example, at doing things like finding directions or understanding maps, but also these more like smaller scale spatial skills. So these are just some tests of spatial ability. This first one, you're given this kind of Tetris-like looking structure. It's three-dimensional, and you have to try to kind of mentally rotate this to match it to these other four, and then decide which of these is the identical object. So some of them are the same, some of them are not, but you have to like mentally rotate that object to figure it out. There's also tests like this, testing perception of orientation, basically. So one of these bottles has the water line is horizontal. I'm pretty sure it's this one. And so it's figuring out, whenever the bottle's at a different tilt, which one's horizontal. This one, you're supposed to try to find this figure hidden or embedded in these. And with all three of these kinds of tasks, males tend to be faster and more accurate than females. That spatial advantage is present throughout most of the lifespan. Like I said, there may be some biological component to this, but no one's really identified exactly how that would happen. What is the gene that would trigger that, for example. But there are studies that show that this may be related to experience. In particular, there's a couple of studies that have basically looked at the role of action video games in enhancing spatial skills. So there was one study, for example, I may have already talked about this in this class, but I don't think I did, where they had males and females do these tasks to get kind of a baseline measure of their spatial abilities, and then they had them play an action-based video game or a different video game that wasn't action-based, and the action-based video game involves a pretty large spatial component. It's one of the ones that's like first-person shooter where you have to run around a map trying to like find the enemy or whatever, so you have to understand the navigation component to try to find them, and there's, you know, that kind of spatial component to it. And what they found is that after the video game, so then after the video game they do all these tests again to see how well they improved. Both males and females improved, but females improved more, so that after playing the video game that gender difference basically disappeared. And so that suggests that maybe things like playing video games also, you know, as a kid, boys are more likely to have toys like Legos, things that also would contribute to that spatial ability. So maybe those experiences are what are driving that gender difference.